In this video, we're going to learn about phrasal verbs. Now, what are phrasal verbs? Phrasal verbs are a combination of verb plus either a preposition or an adverb. So, the combined expression gives me a completely different meaning than the original verb. Let's look at an example. To get, right? That's a verb which means to obtain. So, I can say I went to the shop to get a dress for my cousin's wedding. But the same verb, if I club it, add it with an adverb or a preposition. Let's say I add together with to get. So to get together. To get together gives me a completely different meaning from the original verb to get. What is the meaning of to get together? To meet, right? So if I say let's get together this Saturday for lunch at my place, I'm saying let's meet up, right? So you see how the combination gives me a different meaning from the original verb, right? So how do we put this in context? How do we identify errors pertaining to phrasal verbs in a context? Usually phrasal verbs are used in spoken English and informal texts to be avoided in academic writing, right? It's better to say to postpone than to put off. Now, how will we take this learning and apply it in finding errors? You also need to remember that one phrasal verb can have more than 2 or 3 meanings based on the context. So that's something that we're going to learn in the process. We're going to identify errors pertaining to phrasal verbs. We're going to see if this is the right phrasal verb that we need in this context based on the meaning that it conveys. So let's take a look at that through some example sentences.
Now let's look at our first example. When you go to a temple, you must put off your shoes at the entrance. So are you able to identify the phrasal verb first? The phrasal verb is put off. Put verb plus off preposition, right? Put off is my phrasal verb here. But is this the right phrasal verb in this context? Put off as a phrasal verb brings in the meaning of to postpone, right? I put off doing this particular assignment until next week, right? So I'm postponing this particular work to next week. But in this context, we're talking about a simple meaning, which is to remove. When you go to a temple, you must remove your shoes at the entrance. So what phrasal verb brings in the meaning of remove here? Take off, right? Take off is the phrasal verb which brings in the meaning of remove. So let's make that change. The error is in part 3. You put off and replace that with take off. Error is in part 3. So let's look at another example to understand phrasal verbs. The Delhi Power Regulator has turned out a request by the distribution companies to hike power tariffs in the capital. The highlighted phrase is turned out, and the options are turned up, turned down, turned over, and of course no improvement. Now let's understand turned out as a phrasal verb. What are some of the meanings that it brings? Turned out as a phrasal verb can bring in the meaning of like a produce. For example, I could say the unit turned out 10,000, or the company or the distribution company turned out about 10,000 units a day. It can also bring in the meaning of resulted in an unexpected or gave an unexpected result. So I could say we thought we would fail in this project, but it turned out just well in the end. Or it can also mean or bring in the meaning of attend. So about 10,000 people turned out for the meeting. So these are some of the meanings that turned out as a phrasal verb brings in. What about turn up? Now turn up as a phrasal verb can bring in the meaning of appear. She didn't turn up for class today. Or like increasing the volume. She turned up the music, right? Or she turns the music up. Turn down, on the other hand, means to reject an offer. Or even the other meaning could be decreasing temperature or volume, right? Turn over. Turn over could be handing over to authorities. The court demanded the company to turn over their financial records, just to give you an example. So in this context, the Delhi Power Regulator has dashed a request by the distribution companies to hike power tariffs in the capital. Now, the clue word for you in this context is a request. A request either has to be approved or rejected, right? So in this context, what's the right word? We don't have a phrasal verb which brings in the meaning of approve, but we do have a phrasal verb which brings in the meaning of reject, which is turn down. So that would be the right fit here. The Delhi Power Regulator has turned down a request by the distribution companies to hike power tariffs in the capital.
Having gone through these example sentences, I now know that you will be in a position to not only identify errors pertaining to phrasal verbs, but also understand that each phrasal verb has more than 2 or 3 meanings and know when to apply or which appropriate phrasal verb to use in the context. Also, something that you need to keep in mind is applying the strategy of substitution, right? So when you have a highlighted phrase in a context, it's better for you to go ahead and replace it with your own word and then look at the options given and choose the closest one to the word that you have replaced. So that's a strategy that will also help you arrive at the right answer. So keep practicing and let's move on to our next component in finding errors.